Hey, welcome back. Last time we talked about myth through the generations and how each generation has a different lens with how it focuses myth. And we had really cool interactions. There was a lot of really good interactions. We had some boomers, we had some Gen Xers. Got a great elder Zoomer, Barty Cream. Bart, you'll see it. Big long thing. Much appreciated for all that interaction. It was really cool to see people actually wanting to have this conversation instead of just arguing about it or pointing fingers and saying, "Oh, there's only one true way." I think it's a very nuanced discussion, and really the goal isn't to just be like, "Oh, yeah, we're all different." But I'd like to understand, as a game designer specifically, how do you handle getting different generations together at a table? Because when I play, I do play with some Gen Xers. I mentioned this. I play with a lot more millennials than I do Gen Xers. Just because playing online, and we have some Gen Zers involved in the games, and so I really like to examine what every generation sort of how they approach this hobby. And like last time, we start off with a little bit of a mental imagery with a critical role, and for this one, we can think about on the topic of good, evil, and everything in between, and what does it really mean to be good? Because ultimately, in myths and mythology, the point overall is morality. And what really we use myths for is to teach us not just why things happen, but the right and wrong of things and the correct ways of behaving. As we explore that with this one, we're going to get to some interesting points with the imagery. If you think about Sturm Brightblade's last stand during the War of the Lands, if you don't know what that is, either one of those things, shame on you. I need you to do some homework over the weekend. And he faced off against the Blue Dragon Army High Lord, compared to Matt Mercer's character being introduced and walking up to the corpse of the beloved one that was gathered with the blended family, though there was a correction of it was some extended family. I think generationally that lens shifts a little bit. But his character, if you haven't seen it, his character walks up and he spits on the corpse and wishes the dead ill. It was actually a very cool moment to see that level of engagement. And so again, we ask, when those imageries, what does it really mean to be good? And I think we need to roll back again, and we'll take a step by step on the generations, because you're looking at, let's say, the boomers, and essentially the moral universe of the boomers. They've got, again, it's Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, on that white and black scale palette. Morality was cosmic law for the boomer generation. You see it in the works that they would have come up with. With Howard's writings, with Lovecraft's writings, there was evil was real, it was palatable, and good meant obedience to a higher order in order to defeat evil. It was essentially absolutes. And yes, this is generalities because you have to take discussing generations to take generalities in faith, which is appropriate term for it. But they did. Their worlds and their deeds and their actions, and especially the table, involved redemption arcs through duty, through faith, the things that you should be doing without the reason why is kind of how those works. It was like there was, X was evil, let's go to it. And that's really how they came up. And again, you see that shift slightly with Gen X. Our generation was the generation that watched innocence begin to collapse. Again, The Crow is a good one for us. And you look at Planescape, Dragonlance, again, is one of our settings. And we are learning the variables of how our lens needs to shift. There is still evil in the world, but the halo of good is getting slightly tarnished. The heroes are still noble, but they're ever so slightly broken. Tanis Halfelven, he was a hero, but there's still something wrong with him, whether culturally or psychologically, and that comes clear in the books. Raceland, Raceland's a tough one. was evil. He was a villain. Yes, he had the red robes, but that was never in his heart. But he was flawed. And again, you're like, okay, well, he's going for power, and you see all these things, and you see that fall, and you see how he treats his twin brother, Caramon, and that really starts to inform things. We as a generation, we are started to fall away from trusting institutions. So we are able to question, well, these noble houses can do this. I remember arguing like, well, why does the king, well, Fizbin can, not Fizbin, sorry, Elminster, just go and do it. Like that's no longer a good excuse. The trust in the institution was no longer just a valid reason to begin adventuring for my generation in general. Like I said, evil was still evil, but sometimes there was a little bit of tarnish on the light side as well, and it's just how it was. And that really came through in our media and how we presented ourselves and how the things that we did as a generation as we got older. Truly starts to push that forward into the narrative of the game. Then you start bringing the millennials on board, and then they start bringing with them the I don't know, ethics of empathy. It might be a good phrase for it. There are things like The Last Airbender, again, the Harry Potter. And I know somebody asked about the Harry Potter reference when I said Harry Potter is a community, because it really is a community. You look at how it builds. It's no different than how millennials use the term community now. The Gryffindor is the Gryffindor community. There's a Slytherin community. Hogwarts in general is its overall community, and so that's what I meant by that. Is that there's always this the ethics involved and how you interplay with one another and who you bring into your life, where you might have banks and governments and everything else is collapsing around you. You grew up in a time where you knew peace for a very small sliver of time, and then the entire world began to collapse around you. So in general, millennials don't seek to know who's right. They'd rather answer a question, and that was kind of confirmed by some of the feedback, was who's hurt the most, and then how do we get to that? Morality is in context. It is not just a commandment that thou shalt do. It is, I think, morality is, I think, earned might be an okay phrase for it, which sounds weird that morality seems so fluid, but I think that's how the millennial generation kind of sees this. And evil is not just evil. Now evil has shifted into, well, sure, they're doing bad things, but what traumas do they have? How are they injured? What has been untreated? And that's where you start to see that, where you start to see empathy and I think a lack of accountability. And it may or may not be fair, but I do think accountability begins to slide with the millennial generation in gaming in general. And that's kind of where their fantasies are. And you can see that in some of the games that millennials have produced are very much about asking these questions instead of demanding. Like Dragon or Dungeon World. Sorry, I'm all over the place. It was not feeling well. Dungeon World's a good example. It asks a lot of questions, and it doesn't demand a lot. It doesn't demand that you go adventuring. It asks you to do these things, and it asks you why you get involved. And you can see that Fate's the same way. A lot of these games are written by millennials, and you can see like even in the OSR movement, the games are written by Gen Xers, vastly different animals. Castles and Crusades, written by Gen Xers. Is way different than anything else written around the time and coming out. I know millennials are still too young to do that. You might see some of the young Gen Xers where they blend that line and how they think about gaming in general. And last generation that we're bringing in are the Zoomers. Again, I don't hate the Zoomers. I actually enjoy Gen Z probably more than most Gen Xers for a variety of reasons. They really are one of my favorite generations. I got a chance to lead a lot of Gen Zers, and they're not that bad. Just got to understand how they work, which is kind of the point of all of this. The Zoomers tend to see morality in a pluralistic viewpoint where there's 1,000 different timelines, and there's 1,000 different meanings, and there's 1,000 different possibilities, and 1,000 different reasons of things existing. And so you're no longer looking at simple yes/no gates. Now you're looking at, definite yes ands, no buts, no and. yes buts, and it's really ingrained in their gaming. In their games, it's the collaboration is far more important than I think anything else, and morality becomes part of that collaboration of where they tend to take business. They mix faiths, they mix genres, they mix everything they possibly can into that setting, which is kind of really. I don't know why Eberron's not more popular, but that's probably a different conversation for a different time, because it really is right up there with a world that I think serves all purposes and all generations. But again, that might be a different video. I love Eberron. I've actually written some stuff for Eberron professionally. So, but yeah, I think that does serve their end goals. So you're looking at this and you see, okay, well, there's four different aspects of morality, and you've got where it's absolute, and you've got, well, morality really varies on the situation and everything in between. And so, okay, so what does that do to us at the table, and how do we clash? That's where you start having these debates, where you've got the boomer paladin, who is will argue to death about alignment and alignment mattering, and the moral absolutism. And then you couple that to the ever popular and ever so annoying gnome bard, who is just moral relativism and absurdism and all over the place. And that's where you start to see some of these clashes, and you've got less than, and yes, there are exceptions, but I think there are those stakes in the ground that begin to cause some of these issues when we start looking at the why we game. And you say, like, well, the bard is good in their own way because they don't do X, Y, or Z. And then you got a paladin who's, of course, they're good. But then you have these intergenerational discussions about, well, what does it really mean to be good? Are you technically a paladin of an Aztec god? Well, there's a lot of questions and concerns that can derive from that. And are you a gnome bard of the Assassin's Guild? Okay, well, now you're serving, these a master who's obviously has moral issues and quandaries, if you will. So yeah, you start having these conversations at the table, and I think that's where some of this really starts to break down. Is we have difficulty in having these conversations. I guess not difficult having the conversations. It's difficulty in reaching reasoning. Like the one late stage Zoomer commented, I'm one of those people who, unless I'm playing in Eberron or maybe a different world that's created specifically, orcs are always going to be evil and vile creatures. That's just how I come up. That's how I prefer my orcs. And, the comments like, well, the race or the skin color shouldn't matter, and it doesn't. For me, and I think for a lot of Gen Xers, that's not what we look at. They're not evil because they're orcs. They're evil because they were created nominally by a foul, vile deity in the D&D world, and their whole bent to drive. And alignment is real for us, and we can look at the alignment. I just did a short on alignment that was very snarky, but I think really captures it in about 15 seconds of how alignment is. And so there's some of the difficulties of this conversation. Some things will never change. And again, it's how do you alter that and capture that to get people to be able to play intergenerationally at the table without, arguments or disagreements. Gamers are always going to argue. They're super nerds. We love to argue. So I don't know, is there like some kind of shared code that we have? Zoomers love fluidity. Millennials love empathy. Gen Xers, we have an awareness about us of the cost of things. And not monetarily. And then boomers, they love meaning in things. And so, okay, cool. So you have, belief, burden, compassion, and creation. All right. Well, I think there's a way to get all of that at the table, and we have these conversations, and we start having not different play styles, but maybe better play styles. And you might see a little less aggression. You might see, a little more heterogeneity at the tables, which I said, I admit I do play with them, but the millennials will do things that absolutely irritate the living hell out of me. But for them, it's just it comes naturally. And so I'm trying to understand what makes them tick as a generation in gaming. So I love the comments. Please keep them coming. I'm trying to keep these to like 15-minute digestibles, because I know no one wants to sit there an hour or 4 hours. I'm not Critical Role doing APs. Um, but I will link a video in this one that's a chat that I did with a handful of people years ago. And so if you feel so inclined and you're watching this and you'd like to humor me, I would like you to find the movie Zero Charisma. I think it was 2010. It's on YouTube and Tubi and a few other places. And I will put the link to the discussion we had about the movie at the time. This is probably 5, 6 years ago. I still maintain Zero Charisma. It captures pretty well the scene. Yes, you're going to cringe and you're going to be like, "This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life." Just push past it. It's in that time frame of gamer movies, but it's a good movie. It's well worth watching, and the characters really are stakes in the ground for the various generations, and as they're experiencing the table, and it really is an interesting cautionary tale of kind of what happened to gaming. Um, in the 2010 and forward. So yes, and then comment below. And if you watch it, and you want to listen to some folks who are not all Gen Xers, have a conversation about it. Again, I'll link that video here. But yeah, hopefully everyone's having a interesting time with this. I think I'll have there'll be a handful of videos in this series. But I do want to try and grow. And again, this is really as a designer, because I like to try to capture you. I can't make everyone want to play my childhood role-playing game. And so when I design, I try to encompass as many things as humanly possible that make the most sense for the setting, the tone, and the theme. So yes, please keep commenting, and then please watch the movie. You won't regret it. You may regret it at first, but you're not going to regret it later, especially if you can start having some conversations about it. It's well worth your time. All right. Catch you next time.